Numbers 33 from the Net Bible. Wanderings from Egypt to Sinai. These are the journeys of the Israelites who went out of the land of Egypt by their divisions under the authority of Moses and Aaron. Moses recorded their departures according to their journeys by the commandment of the Lord. Now these are their journeys according to their departures. They departed from Ramesses in the first month, on the 15th day of the first month. On the day after the Passover, the Israelites went out defiantly in plain sight of all the Egyptians. Now the Egyptians were burying all their firstborn, whom the Lord had killed among them. The Lord also executed judgments on their gods. The Israelites travelled from Ramesses and camped in Succoth. They travelled from Succoth and camped in Etham, which is on the edge of the wilderness. They travelled from Etham and turned again to Pi-hahiroth, which is before Baal-zephon, and they camped before Migdal. They travelled from Pi-hahiroth and passed through the middle of the sea into the wilderness, and went 3 days' journey in the wilderness of Etham, and camped in Marah. They travelled from Marah and came to Elim. In Elim there are 12 fountains of water and 70 palm trees, so they camped there. They travelled from Elim and camped by the Red Sea. They travelled from the Red Sea and camped in the wilderness of Zin. They travelled from the wilderness of Zin and camped in Dophkar. And they travelled from Dophkar and camped in Alush. They travelled from Alush and camped at Rephidim, where there was no water for the people to drink. They travelled from Rephidim and camped in the wilderness of Sinai. Wanderings in the wilderness. They travelled from the desert of Sinai and camped at Kibroth-Hattaavah. They travelled from Kibroth-Hattaavah and camped at Hazeroth. They travelled from Hazeroth and camped in Rithmah. They travelled from Rithmah and camped at Rimmon-Perez. They travelled from Rimmon-Perez and camped in Libnah. They travelled from Libnah and camped at Rissah. They travelled from Rissah and camped in Kehelathah. They travelled from Kehelathah and camped at Mount Shepha. They travelled from Mount Shepha and camped in Haradah. They travelled from Haradah and camped in Makheloth. They travelled from Makheloth and camped at Tahath. They travelled from Tahath and camped at Terah. They travelled from Terah and camped in Mithkah. They travelled from Mithkah and camped in Hashmonah. They travelled from Hashmonah and camped in Moseroth. They travelled from Moseroth and camped in Bene Jaakan. They travelled from Bene Jaakan and camped at Hor Haggidgad. They travelled from Hor Haggidgad and camped in Jotbathar. They travelled from Jotbathar and camped in Abrona. They travelled from Abrona and camped at Ezion-Geber. They travelled from Ezion-Geber and camped in the wilderness of Zin, which is Kadesh. Wanderings from Kadesh to Moab. They travelled from Kadesh and camped in Mount Hor at the edge of the land of Edom. Aaron the priest ascended Mount Hor at the command of the Lord, and he died there in the 40th year after the Israelites had come out of the land of Egypt, on the first day of the 5th month. Now Aaron was 123 years old when he died in Mount Hor. The king of Arad, the Canaanite king who lived in the south of the land of Canaan, heard about the approach of the Israelites. They travelled from Mount Hor and camped in Zalmonah. They travelled from Zalmonah and camped in Punon. They travelled from Punon and camped in Oboth. They travelled from Oboth and camped in Ai-Abarim, on the border of Moab. They travelled from Aim and camped in Dibon-Gad. They travelled from Dibon-Gad and camped in Almon-Diblathaim. They travelled from Almon-Diblathaim and camped in the mountains of Abarim before Nebo. They travelled from the mountains of Abarim and camped in the plains of Moab by the Jordan River across from Jericho. They camped by the Jordan from Beth Jeshimoth as far as Abel Shittim in the plains of Moab. At the border of Canaan. The Lord spoke to Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho. He said, "Speak to the Israelites and tell them, when you have crossed the Jordan into the land of Canaan, you must drive out all the inhabitants of the land before you. Destroy all their carved images, all their molten images, and demolish their high places. You must dispossess the inhabitants of the land and live in it, for I have given you the land to possess it. You must divide the land by lot for an inheritance among your families. To a larger group you must give a larger inheritance, and to a smaller group you must give a smaller inheritance. Everyone's inheritance must be in the place where his lot falls. You must inherit according to your ancestral tribes. But if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land before you, then those who you allow to remain will be irritants in your eyes and thorns in your side, and will cause you trouble in the land where you will be living. And what I intended to do to them, I will do to you." Proverbs 24 from the Net Bible. Do not envy evil people. Do not desire to be with them, for their hearts contemplate violence, and their lips speak harm. By wisdom a house is built, and through understanding it is established. By knowledge its rooms are filled with all kinds of precious and pleasing treasures. A wise warrior is strong, and a man of knowledge makes his strength stronger. For with guidance you wage your war, and with numerous advisers there is victory. Wisdom is unattainable for a fool. In court he does not open his mouth. The one who plans to do evil will be called a scheming person. A foolish scheme is sin, and the scorner is an abomination to people. If you faint in the day of trouble, your strength is small. Deliver those being taken away to death, and hold back those slipping to the slaughter. If you say, "But we did not know about this," does not the one who evaluates hearts consider? Does not the one who guards your life know? Will he not repay each person according to his deeds? Eat honey, my child, for it is good, and honey from the honeycomb is sweet to your taste. Likewise, know that wisdom is sweet to your soul. If you find it, you will have a future, and your hope will not be cut off. Do not lie in wait like the wicked against the place where the righteous live. Do not assault his home. Although a righteous person may fall 7 times, he gets up again, but the wicked will be brought down by calamity. Do not rejoice when your enemy falls, and when he stumbles, do not let your heart rejoice, lest the Lord see it, and be displeased, and turn his wrath away from him. Do not fret because of evil people, or be envious of wicked people, for the evil person has no future, and the lamp of the wicked will be extinguished. Fear the Lord, my child, as well as the king, and do not associate with rebels, for suddenly their destruction will overtake them, and who knows the ruinous judgment both the Lord and the king can bring. Further sayings of the wise. These sayings also are from the wise. To show partiality in judgment is terrible. The one who says to the guilty, "You are innocent," peoples will curse him, and nations will denounce him. but there will be delight for those who convict the guilty, and a pleasing blessing will come on them. Like a kiss on the lips is the one who gives an honest answer. Establish your work outside and get your fields ready. Afterward build your house. Do not be a witness against your neighbour without cause, and do not deceive with your words. Do not say, I will do to him just as he has done to me. I will pay him back according to what he has done. I passed by the field of a sluggard, by the vineyard of one who lacks wisdom. I saw that thorns had grown up all over it. The ground was covered with weeds, and its stone wall was broken down. When I saw this, I gave careful consideration to it. I received instruction from what I saw, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to relax, and your poverty will come like a bandit, and your need like an armed robber. John 6 from the Net Bible. The feeding of the 5,000. After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd was following him because they were observing the miraculous signs he was performing on the sick. So Jesus went up on the mountainside and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Jewish feast of the Passover was near. Then Jesus, when he looked up and saw that a large crowd was coming to him, said to Philip, Where can we buy bread so that these people may eat? Now Jesus said this to test him, for he knew what he was going to do. Philip replied, 200 silver coins worth of bread would not be enough for them, for each one to get a little. One of Jesus' disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, Here is a boy who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what good are these for so many people? Jesus said, Have the people sit down. Now there was a lot of grass in that place. So the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed the bread to those who were seated. He then did the same with the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were all satisfied, Jesus said to his disciples, Gather up the broken pieces that are left over, so that nothing is wasted. So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with broken pieces from the 5 barley loaves left over by the people who had eaten. Now when the people saw the miraculous sign that Jesus performed, they began to say to one another, This is certainly the prophet who is to come into the world. Then Jesus, because he knew they were going to come and seize him by force to make him king, withdrew again up the mountainside alone. Walking on water. Now when evening came, his disciples went down to the lake, got into a boat, and started to cross the lake to Capernaum. It had already become dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. By now a strong wind was blowing, and the sea was getting rough. Then, when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they caught sight of Jesus walking on the lake, approaching the boat, and they were frightened. But he said to them, It is I, do not be afraid. Then they wanted to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat came to the land where they had been heading. The next day, the crowd that remained on the other side of the lake realized that only one small boat had been there, and that Jesus had not boarded it with his disciples, but that his disciples had gone away alone. Other boats from Tiberias came to shore near the place where they had eaten the bread after the Lord had given thanks. So when the crowd realised that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they got into the boats and came to Capernaum looking for Jesus. Jesus' discourse about the bread of life. When they found him on the other side of the lake, they said to him, "Rabbi, when did you get here?" Jesus replied, "I tell you the solemn truth. You are looking for me not because you saw miraculous signs, but because you ate all the loaves of bread you wanted. Do not work for the food that disappears, but for the food that remains to eternal life, the food which the Son of Man will give to you. For God the Father has put his seal of approval on him." So then they said to him, "What must we do to accomplish the deeds God requires?" Jesus replied, "This is the deed God requires, to believe in the one whom he sent." So they said to him, "Then what miraculous sign will you perform so that we may see it and believe you? What will you do?" "Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, just as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat." Then Jesus told them, "I tell you the solemn truth. It is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven, but my Father is giving you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the one who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." So they said to him, "Sir, give us this bread all the time." Jesus said to them, "I am the bread of life. The one who comes to me will never go hungry, and the one who believes in me will never be thirsty. But I told you that you have seen me and still do not believe. Everyone whom the Father gives me will come to me, and the one who comes to me I will never send away. For I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of the one who sent me. Now this is the will of the one who sent me, that I should not lose one person of every one he has given me, but raise them all up at the last day. For this is the will of my Father, for everyone who looks on the Son and believes in him to have eternal life, and I will raise him up at the last day." Then the Jews who were hostile to Jesus began complaining about him because he said, "I am the bread that came down from heaven." And they said, "Isn't this Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How can he now say, 'I have come down from heaven'?" Jesus replied, "Do not complain about me to one another. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I will raise him up at the last day. It is written in the prophets, and they will all be taught by God. Everyone who hears and learns from the Father comes to me. Not that anyone has seen the Father except the one who is from God. He has seen the Father. I tell you the solemn truth. The one who believes has eternal life. I am the bread of life. Your ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness and they died. This is the bread that has come down from heaven, so that a person may eat from it and not die. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. If anyone eats from this bread, he will live forever. The bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh." Then the Jews who were hostile to Jesus began to argue with one another. "How can this man give us his flesh to eat?" Jesus said to them, "I tell you the solemn truth. Unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in yourselves. The one who eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. For my flesh is true food, and my blood is true drink. The one who eats my flesh and drinks my blood resides in me, and I in him. Just as the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so the one who consumes me will live because of me. This is the bread that came down from heaven. It is not like the bread your ancestors ate but then later died. The one who eats this bread will live forever. Many followers depart. Jesus said these things while he was teaching in the synagogue in Capernaum. Then many of his disciples, when they heard these things, said, "This is a difficult saying. Who can understand it?" When Jesus was aware that his disciples were complaining about this, he said to them, "Does this cause you to be offended? Then what if you see the Son of Man ascending where he was before? The Spirit is the one who gives life. Human nature is of no help. The words that I have spoken to you are spirit and are life. But there are some of you who do not believe." For Jesus had already known from the beginning who those were who did not believe, and who it was who would betray him. So Jesus added, "Because of this, I told you that no one can come to me unless the Father has allowed him to come." Peter's confession. After this, many of his disciples quit following him and did not accompany him any longer. So Jesus said to the 12, "You don't want to go away too, do you?" Simon Peter answered him, "Lord, to whom would we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and to know that you are the Holy One of God." Jesus replied, "Didn't I choose you, the 12? And yet one of you is the devil." Now he said this about Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, for Judas, one of the 12, was going to betray him.